In 79 AD, deep under Rome's largest arena, a 19-year-old Dacian girl named Sabina stood shackled in a pitch-black cell. The air was thick with the smell of damp stone, rusted iron, and the terror of those who had stood there before her. Directly above her head, through layers of wood and sand, the vibrations of 50,000 Romans roaring in celebration shook dust from the ceiling. They were cheering for the very gladiator who had just murdered her brothers. But what happened to her over the next 3 hours would become one of Rome's most aggressively covered-up practices. It was a ritual so vicious, so coldly calculated, that even Rome's own historians, men used to war and crucifixion, argued over whether to mention it at all. This is the story Roman senators tried to wipe from the record. The story of a reward that turned a victor into a monster behind closed gates. Before we descend into those underground rooms to uncover the truth, hit that like button if you've ever wondered what actually happened in the arena after the crowds went home. Subscribe, because once you hear this story, you will never look at the ruins of ancient Rome the same way again. Comment below, did Roman entertainment simply cross the line, or was this industrialized cruelty the necessary cost of maintaining an empire? What you are about to hear isn't a myth or a movie script. It comes straight from Cassius Dio's fragmented accounts, confirmed by chilling 2018 excavations beneath the Colosseum's eastern curve and supported by Senate documents buried in the Vatican archive. These were the events Rome labeled as sport, the grim reality behind the golden age of the empire. To understand Sabina's fate, you first have to understand where she was. The Colosseum wasn't just a building, it was a machine. Completed around 80 AD, just a year after the events of this story, it was Rome's ultimate monument to dominance. It was large enough to swallow entire armies. The sensory overload was designed to intoxicate. The air didn't just smell of sweat. It reeked of exotic perfume sprayed over the crowd to mask the stench of blood, mixed with the metallic tang of weapons and the musk of wild animals imported from Africa. The arena floor wasn't covered in sand for decoration. The word arena literally means sand in Latin. It was there for a practical purpose, to soak up the fluids that poured out of dying fighters and beasts so the games wouldn't become slippery. But the real city lay beneath that sand, the Hypogeum. A two-story subterranean labyrinth of tunnels, trapdoors, and cages. This was the backstage of death. Here, elaborate elevators lifted lions, bears, and men into the sunlight to die. And tucked away in the darkest corners of this labyrinth were the holding cells for Rome's most valuable disposable assets, the condemned, the captured, and the conquered. Gladiator games were never just about entertainment, they were political messaging. When General Marcus Antonius crushed the Dacian uprising in 78 AD, he didn't just bring back gold. He returned with 847 captives, including 120 for noblewomen. Sabina was one of them. Rome didn't just want to defeat these people. It needed to humiliate them so completely that the idea of rebellion would die with them. Now, meet the other player in this tragedy. Gaius Valerius Maximus, 32 years old. Nearly 6 feet tall, a giant, by Roman standards, his body was a living map of violence. Every scar was a story of a fight won, a life taken, a crowd thrilled. He wasn't a volunteer. Born a slave after his father died in a debt prison, Gaius had spent 14 brutal years in the Ludus Magnus, the gladiator school right next to the Colosseum. He had killed 89 men in official combat. His life was a binary existence, kill or die. His dream was simple: earn the rudies, the wooden sword that symbolized freedom. His worst fear was the one shared by every man in the barracks: to die anonymously, dragged out of the arena by slaves wielding meat hooks, his body dumped into the Tiber River like garbage. But on that August afternoon in 79 AD, fate intervened. He defeated the Dacian champion right in front of Emperor Titus. The crowd went wild. His reward followed the standard imperial protocol: 500 silver denarii, a laurel wreath, and first selection among the female captives. Sabina, with her dark Highland hair and pale skin, stood in a holding cell among 17 other women. Before Rome burned her village, she was a weaver, engaged to a warrior named Decebalus. Now, she waited in silence. Her world was gone, her future was erased. She didn't want mercy, she wanted dignity, she wanted death. But that morning, a guard with a wax tablet had informed her she'd been picked for the afternoon's special event. She didn't yet understand that Rome's version of mercy was far more horrifying than its cruelty. This wasn't just about individual lust or violence. It was psychological warfare. Rome knew that physical conquest wasn't enough. True domination meant breaking a people's symbols, corrupting their bloodlines, and proving that even the most protected members of their society, their noblewomen, now belonged to the lowest slave in Rome, provided he was a winner. The horror began during the afternoon interlude. Usually, this time was reserved for executions or light entertainment. But today, the arena officials had planned a theatrical display celebrating Rome's dominance over barbaric shame. 20 Dacian women, including Sabina, were lifted via the elevator systems onto the burning sands of the arena. The sunlight was blinding after days in the dark. The noise was a physical blow. 50,000 people screaming, laughing, eating roasted chickpeas, betting on their lives. The women were lined up as a herald announced their crimes: rebellion, aiding enemies, refusing Roman gods. Then came the twist. They were handed dull wooden swords and forced into pairs. They were ordered to fight. The winners would be claimed by Rome's champions as prizes. The losers would be executed on the spot. If this level of calculated cruelty shocks you, tap that like button, because what comes next proves this wasn't chaos, it was policy. The breaking point arrived. Sabina stood across from Chronicles, a woman who had once sung at her engagement ceremony. They held the wooden swords, the rough grain scraping their palms. The master of games raised his hand and dropped it. The crowd screamed fight, but neither woman moved. The roar of the crowd shifted. Excitement turned to confusion, then to rage. Cowards, they yelled. Trash, food scraps, olive pits, and stones began to rain down from the stands. For 90 full seconds, the greatest empire on earth was publicly defied by two unarmed women standing perfectly still. It was the only resistance left to them: refusal. Then, the guards stormed in. The stage drama dissolved into real violence. Chronicles was struck down with the flat of a sword, collapsing into the dust. Sabina screamed and rushed toward her, dropping her weapon. Both were dragged away, not to execution, but to something the audience found just as entertaining. The real horror began below, in the hypogeum. The bureaucratic engine of Roman exploitation kept moving without a heartbeat of hesitation. A scribe entered a note into the official record: 20 female captives, Dacian origin, processed for post-victory allocation, next line, to resistant. Transferred to private chambers for champion exclusive use. What came next was Rome's most polished system of dehumanization. Human beings were reduced to inventory. Sabina was taken to a small stone chamber. It was clean, organized, and terrifying precisely because everything was planned. There were iron rings embedded in the walls. A stone bench, a door that locked only from the outside. This wasn't improvised cruelty. These rooms were part of the arena's architectural design, just as intentional as the lion cages. At 4 p.m., Gaius Valerius Maximus entered Sabina's chamber. The heavy wooden door creaked shut, locking them in. Gaius was still in his full arena gear, greaves on his legs, the heavy leather belt. The smell of someone else's blood streaked across his chest. Sabina was cornered against the far wall, drained, unarmed, trembling. Between them stood the full weight of Roman law. He had complete legal power, she had none. She was classified as premier bonus. History doesn't tell us exactly what Gaius thought in that moment. Did he see a person, or did he see property? Did he look at her and see the same fear he felt every time he stepped onto the sand? All we know comes from a clerk's routine report, not from their diaries. Then, the unimaginable happened, an act of rebellion. Gaius reached up and took off his helmet. He unbuckled his sword belt and set the weapon aside. He sat down on the stone bench and buried his head in his hands. For 5 long minutes, the room was silent, save for the muffled thumping of feet from the arena floor above them. Sabina remained frozen, bracing for the violence that never came. Finally, Gaius spoke. He used broken Dacian, a language he had picked up from other captives in the Gladiator school. What was his name? He asked, his voice raspy from the dust. Mine, Sabina whispered, confused. No, The man they made you watch die. The champion, Decebalus, Gaius sighed, a heavy, exhausted sound. I killed a Decebalus today, could be family. Your people use that name often. What followed wasn't the assault Rome expected. It was a conversation between two people the empire had tried to strip of every shred of humanity. Gaius told her about his father, executed when he was 9. Sabina explained how her home was burned, how the smoke smelled like pine and flesh 2 hours passed in that stone box. Guards checked the door twice, heard low voices, assumed compliance, and walked on. At 6 p.m., Gaius Valerius Maximus made the decision Rome would never forgive him for. He stood up, walked to the heavy door, and pounded on it until the guard returned. This woman is ill, Gaius declared, his voice booming. She is infected, the pox. I refuse the allocation. Send her to the physician immediately. It was a lie, a blatant one, but it was also the only loophole the arena system allowed. If a captive was labeled diseased, a gladiator could legally reject her to protect his own health, returning her to general prisoner status. The guard looked at Sabina, then at Gaius. He knew it was a lie. But Roman bureaucracy ran on rigid procedure, not truth. Challenging a gladiator's choice meant paperwork, witnesses, and an inquiry. Accepting the rejection took seconds. As you wish, champion, the guard grunted, and so, Sabina was removed. Sabina was taken to the medical holding section. The tragedy is that this mercy only brought her a different kind of end. She died 3 days later from a simple infection, likely typhus, the most common killer in the filth of Roman captivity. The medical unit was overcrowded, filthy, and apathetic. The mercy that spared her from one horror delivered her directly into another. But Gaius, he never saw her again. He fought twice more that month. He won both bouts. And he refused his rewards both times. The empire froze. Whispers spread through the gladiator barracks. Maximus has gone soft. Maximus has joined one of those strange Eastern cults preaching compassion. But the truth was simpler. He hadn't gone soft. He had just remembered what it meant to be human. This single act of defiance rippled upward. On September 15th, 79 AD, Senator Quintus Aurelius Symmachus stood before the Senate with an official complaint. His nephew, a junior gladiator, had been beaten by his trainer for refusing a reward, citing Maximus as his inspiration. This forced Rome's most powerful men to acknowledge a practice everyone knew existed, but no one spoke about. The debate that followed wasn't about morality, it was about politics. Provincial governors were reporting that the humiliation of captive women was radicalizing the local populations. It wasn't scaring the enemy anymore, it was creating martyrs. On October 1st, 79 AD, the Senate passed the Lex Captiva, the law of captives. It banned the public distribution of female prisoners as arena rewards. It didn't end slavery, and it didn't stop private abuse, but it ended the public spectacle of it. Rome had blinked. In 2018, archaeologists led by Dr. Isabella Fortunato excavated a forgotten section of the eastern hypogea. What they found never appeared on tourist brochures. They found a cluster of small chambers with iron restraints built directly into the stone walls. They found drainage channels cut into the floors for easy cleaning. And most haunting of all, they found 6 bronze tags stamped with the word Captiva and dates spanning 79 to 82 AD. Gaius Valerius Maximus eventually won his freedom. His last recorded act as a free man was purchasing the freedom of a Dacian woman named Camosicus, the very woman who had stood beside Sabina on the arena floor. Imagine Gaius realizing that his single act of defiance saved one woman for a handful of days. Nothing more. It changed nothing for the thousands who came before or the thousands who would come after. The machine was too big, but for those few hours in the dark, the machine failed. If this story unsettled you, subscribe, because uncomfortable truths matter far more than comforting myths. Tell us in the comments what disturbed you most, the calculated nature of the exploitation, or the fact that Rome was so efficient at making it routine. Remember, history's darkest secrets often hide beneath civilization's greatest monuments. The blood on the sand wasn't always from battle. Sometimes it came from innocence turned into spectacle, from power without restraint, and from the moments humanity looked away while cruelty received applause.